matter. Having said that, I wish to say that, as I said earlier, I am a member of the Youth Coalition, the Youth Coalition on Electoral Democracy. It is the coalition that comes up with the National Youth Manifesto. Currently, we are in a process to do consultations for the next one, 2021-2016. And the manifesto usually helps us to identify gaps that are in policy instruments in areas where we feel the next government should focus emphasis in youth development. And you can clearly see that the youth, even when my brother here was pointing out whether they are consulting, we have Sadat Zanga here, we are having so many young persons. I am out of the constitutional youth bracket, but I'm a youth player. So we can assure him that, the study has touched so many, the actual people that mind about youth issues in this country. But having said that, what I was saying is that you notice that even when we pointed out the national youth policy, which also went through a consultative process, the final document that we currently have, which caused the fracas that we saw at the launch, was that a few people had not been brought on the table, although a lot had already been done anyway. But also the document came out leaving gaps because a period of time had passed, so emerging issues had not been adequately captured. But you will see that the key players, the persons there, who come up with programs that are responsive, because again, most of our national programming is in response to certain things. They are not consultative or coming from the bottom up, where the actual beneficiaries point out and say, these are our areas. To give you an example, we have the Youth Manifesto. It highlights 5 key issues where the youth feels government should prioritize in terms of policy and legislation. But again, if you go to areas of resource allocation, those are not the key issues. That is education, creation of jobs or employment, health, political participation, and fine arts, creative arts, and culture. Those are not the key areas where government, puts resources. They actually form lists. So my challenge with all these findings is how we are going to touch the actual people to come up with a paradigm shift. The actual persons that are gatekeepers to power, I know Mr. Mondo is one of them, but he has a big task to influence a really big section of people who sit at that table, is my challenge.
Thank you, and I think that's a pertinent question. How do you scale up this? There are studies in resilience, for instance, have gone way up in terms of application. People have written about resilience states, resilience companies, resilience in the banking sector. You get what I mean? People have operationalized this concept, but they are talking about those institutional structural arrangements of what is a resilient state looks like. The resilient individual person is not discussed. The assumption is that individuals are compliant to the system and they obey, and you get what I mean? And therefore, when the state dictates, you obey. But that is the mistake that state formation did in Africa. The assumption was that you create this state with a constitution. All people will succumb and they pay and obey the constitution. But we know from experience across Africa that that's not the case. They are communal, relational elements that define belonging. And if they miss within the understanding of the state, people will resist it. They will constantly mobilize against it because of the unique forms of identity and expectations and belonging that they seek to achieve. So resilience at an individual level ought to bring that within the understanding and the practice of the state, so that the person and the state are together. are communicating. Citizenship and identity formation are communicating well within the society that they live. That the tribe and the government can communicate well. They have values that they share that define the way they interact. You get what I mean? Other than each one, the moment you begin talking about government, the state doesn't, the community doesn't see itself. Okay? You define a citizen according to the constitution, and I will define myself as a Muganda, and that is different. We have different departure moments. So the resilience of the individual in all these, resilient military, resilient, and I'm a consultant to the UPDF. I've done work on the defense doctrine, and these are issues that they never talk about. They don't see the individual person. They see a soldier trained to execute a task, period. You get what I mean? So you are right that how do we bring that in? That's why I started with Thomas Kuhn. And the book is The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. How do we shift paradigms to make sure that these elements inform the way state communities interact? Sorry, I interjected you, but I was expanding on her challenge, and we don't have the answer, but you are very right. That's what we should be talking about.
Thank you so much for the research. I'm sure that as a ministry we should be able to get copies so that we can inform ourselves further. I wouldn't mind inviting you to one of our meetings, maybe to make a PowerPoint presentation. The lessons are varied, but I have just a few questions I wanted to ask. Jinja and Kampala are both cosmopolitan. Did you, in your investigation, find the influence of cultures being part of why they don't fight? Did you also try to interrogate the influence of poverty? It is Franz Fanon, in his book, The Wretched of the Earth, who says that the best revolutionaries or the best fighters are the poor people. Because when it comes to fighting, they have nothing to lose apart from their tatters. So they go into fighting, they have no property, and so they look at fighting as a solution to their poverty and being able to either root or being able to escape the current government to plug into the next government. But also I wanted to ask you, when you talk about fighting, must people always fight to change a situation? Do you believe in Mahatma Gandhi? Mahatma Gandhi believed in, silent resistance, non-violent resistance. And you can resist in your heart. You say, I will not work with them. You shun everything they are giving to you. That's another kind of resistance. Did you find that as part of what perhaps some young people who are not fighting, they have decided to be non-violent but resisting a situation? We had General Otafire the other day. He was telling us a story about a daughter who was in P3, and the daughter came back home and asked her, Daddy, did you people spend 5 years in the bush fighting? Then he said, the flamboyant general that I am. I said, oh yes, and that's why you are having the peace you are having here. And this young girl in P3, as I said, asked again, I said, Daddy, were you people mad? What's that you could not sit on table and resolve peacefully? But Afire goes ahead to tell us, he said, he felt not like a general, because this girl in P3 asking such hard stuff, he couldn't believe it. Then the other issue I wanted you to comment on, did you find the element of fatigue? Because you see, you can resist, you fight, and you see nothing is changing. And so you get fatigue, you say, you hinted on that one, but you said that the other one was because of the family, that started talking about the family. And that, I want to align that when you are commenting about YLP and UWEP. It is again Mahatma Gandhi who said that poverty is the worst form of violence. Poverty is the worst form of violence. So as government, we believe that through these programs, if we caution people against poverty, they are unlikely to engage in sometimes I can call them useless fighting. Because I've seen some young people, when Westgate is working, they just join in. You know, some kind of, but they don't know what Westgate is fighting for. You find him, you ask him, now, why are you here? He said, but me, I saw people walking. I've also decided to walk. And so, if we engage these young people, this is what we believe in. If we engage them, and they have a business drive, they are unlikely to go out fighting or rioting or something of that sort. Then the other, did you try to interrogate, it is Machiavelli in his book, The Prince, who talks about that when you are going to use violence maximally and at once, and people will not resist again. I remember when I was at Makerere, there was a strike. They killed the 3 of us. For about 5 years, there was no strike in the university. Because we realized that this government can be rhythm. They can decide to shoot, to kill. They killed the 3 people. I think by then the good president was Norbert Mao, and the speaker was Orania. It was a good combination of these two people. So the issue of the use of maximum force, and that's what Machiavelli says, that if you're going to use force, use it maximally and at once, and you instill fear into the people who otherwise would have resisted. I had some people from police, I'm not telling you to come and do that. You have done it before, but don't go and do that. Then the last one that we are believing in as a government, which we are constructing, we talked about unity. We are thinking of a national youth service scheme. Like in Kenya, they have one, in Ghana, they have one. It's an engagement of the younger people to make them appreciate the issue of unity, but also appreciate unity in diversity. So that you don't believe you're Uganda, I'm Msoga, what, we are all Ugandan at the end of the day. But as you say, we continue carrying those tags. I'm Uganda, I'm Msoga, I'm Melanie, I'm this and the other. And it was made worse because once upon a time, I don't know where you come from, but people from where you come from would cross over and study in northern Uganda. We had so many, in Msoga College Mwiri, we had so many people who are coming from Ankole, who are studying in Msoga College Mwiri. And so there was that interaction and bring people believe that they are Ugandan. But now,
my hobby.
Oh my God, I was in Navikamba. Don't panic, don't panic. So there was that. And so you'll find a Uganda who came from somewhere, was studying whatever in Mwiri. But now, in every village, there is a secondary school. So people are not finding any reason why cross over if you can study from nearby. And finally, what they do, they study nearby, they marry nearby, and so even intermarriage that would have cemented relationship between Langi and the Msoga is not there. What about interrogating that? Do you believe that intermarriages is one of the ways we can cement unity? Because I didn't marry from where I was born. I married somewhere else, I will not mention where. And so anything that points where my wife comes from, I'll resist and say, those people are very good.
Let me start with that. That depends on the incentives. If government creates an incentive for people to you know, cross-categorization, decategorization arrangement, as I was talking about. If students from Umbarara have an incentive to study in Karamoja, and their incentives created there for somebody to go there, and if people from Karamoja have an incentive to come to go to Hoima for an education, there are incentives that can be built within the education scheme that students, if you're from a different region and like this, these are the what? These are the mechanisms that are there. I did my master's and PhD in the States, and there are areas where they said you don't have fees and so on, but because you're an international student, you qualify for this. In other words, there is a way, there's a hook they put there that, despite the hard conditions, that attracts me to say, maybe let me hang around as long as this one is there, you know. So you are very right on that, but let me react on a few things. One,
can I finish?
Okay.
I had just two more to finish up. The other thing that we thought would be a way of cementing unity is through the National Youth Council that you have mentioned. That you bring young people together under the National Youth Council framework. You find them in Yankole, you find them in Chiga, you find this and the other. But what brings them together is the issue of the age. That we are within this age category, and therefore we have a common problem, and so we sit together, we discuss these things without necessarily resorting to fighting. Because as I said, I don't believe that fighting is the only way we can change certain things. Then finally, do you think sports and games, promotion of sports and games, could be another avenue? Because we are looking at how to prevent these fights if they occur at all. Do you look at sports and games as an avenue? Because I have seen people in a team, when they are playing, they become a team. Regardless of whether one is a Mchiga, another is a Lania, another is a what. What brings them together is that they are in this team. And so we are Uganda cranes, we must go and win. Unfortunately, we have not invested as much as we ought to in sports and games in this country. Do you look at that? Or did you see it coming up as one of the ways through which you can recommend? Because you talked about recommendations from Ministry of Gender, you talked about recommendations from Ministry of the Sports, and I thought that this issue of sports and games could be one way that we can, you know, ensure that there is unity and people treat each other as Ugandan, who, when they're in a team, all they need is to win the game, regardless of where you come from, regardless of religion, regardless of tribe. But go back to the National Youth Service scheme. It's a way, it has worked elsewhere. And it's before cabinet, as I speak now. We want, there is certain periods in the year when the students are so idle. You know that period after senior 6, they are idle for a number of months. We thought that if we engage them in something to do with National Youth Service scheme, because under this program, there is also getting to know the country better. I remember when I was young, there was something called political education, which went to the dogs. I no longer hear about it. But that's when you get even to understand the symbols of the state. In Uganda here, very few of us can sing the national anthem from stanza 1 to stanza 3. But let alone singing, do we understand what we are saying, what the anthem is talking about? Do we understand the Uganda flag? I have seen sometimes the Germany flag. People thinking that it's the Ugandan flag. Because we share the colors, but the order matters. And so such things, we believe that they can bring unity in the people, but also if people get to understand what they are singing in the Uganda anthem, for instance, I think it can be a step forward in trying to reduce some of these very useless conflicts that we encounter. I raise my case, sir.
Thank you very much. On the question of sports, The critical stakeholders in policy development and implementation in this book, we have arts, drama, and sports clubs and associations as important, because we discovered that those are important vehicles in terms of promoting pro-social values and building cohesion amongst the youth towards, you know, and interacting with each other. So sports, you are right. Number two, we found an influence on culture. You are very right. That did you find culture playing a role? Yes, we do, but at two levels. And this is one. You see, identity matters, and I have been in studies on identity for a long time. The Basoga identity is not as strong as the Baganda identity. The Baganda identity claims to have a 400 years history and all those blah, 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 so many things. The Basoga identity was a construction of the colonial state. And there has been a strong dependency on the state to preserve Basoga. I had that discussion with the Professor Nabuiso. You know Nabuiso? Yes. Yeah. I had and I read some of his work, and I told him, what is this thing of? He says, he agrees that that was a construction of the state from the 5 chiefdoms that were put together that formed the Basoga. And those departure points are important in terms of how people see their primordial existence, you know, from way back. And therefore the demand, the force with which they claim entitlements from the state is different based on that. That is one. Two is that at a family level, in terms of influence, in terms of attachment to society, in terms of attachment to lineages, the Basogas and the Bagandas have similarities, many similarities. And at that level, that is where we found strong cultural influences. That yes, culture influences a lot, because the values within a family, within a community, amongst the Baganda and Basoga are closely similar, and they influence a lot the attachment, the social bonding that we have talked about. So it is important for us to profile that. And we recommended in one of the write-ups that was published we published a journal. We have published 2 articles from this research. One is in the peer review, and people were referring to Echisakat, expanding those cultural, you know, practices and creating spaces for people, children to learn. Not the current one, but you know, making it a little bit more more frequent and exposing people a lot more to culture and traditions amongst the Basoga. So you are very right that culture should be brought into the understanding and the definition of relationships and the bonding that must exist as a necessary condition for these other programs to thrive, for these other programs. And I underline the word a necessary condition. Religion and culture must be provide the foundation and the necessary condition for the structural programs to function effectively. Because the relationships and the bonding, Harold Sanders wrote this book called Public Peace Processes, and his experience was from the negotiating Israel-Palestine conflicts and Tajikistan and the former Soviet Union and so on. And he concluded that relationships are the necessary condition for all structural arrangements to function effectively. He said, we failed in Israel-Palestine because we have not built relationships. We are focusing on boundaries. This is where Israel stops, this is Palestine, these are the boundaries, no airspace and so on. He said all these are structural issues. The people at the bottom need to understand each other. You know, and he did a similar project in Tajikistan, which suffered years of war, and until now, for the last 20 years, I think they have not had a major uprising, you know, because they initiated projects, programs at the local level that were building communities to understand each other. Without foreign intervention, they just empowered them and created the space for that. So, again, culture plays a critical role and helps to create that space. On the question of poverty...
Excuse me, before you go to poverty, still on the issue of culture.
And religion, yes.
Yes, we know that culture promotes social values, relationships, and social cohesion, but it also brings about discrimination. I don't know how deep you went into that, because we are looking at, because of course we know that it is not static. We have seen cultures evolving and becoming dynamic all the time. So I don't know whether you have looked at how all these different stakeholders, how they can regulate it, because if you look at issues like FGM, manipulation, and the other one of manipulation, and the other one from Kapchorwa.
Yeah, the mutilation.
Manipulation and mutilation.
There's also down in Uganda.
That's the manipulation.
That is the manipulation.
So
there is a way, I don't know how we could, I don't know, put emphasis that yes, it is good, but in some instances it has brought about...
Let me tell you, remind you of a statement I made earlier, that tribal identities and the cultures associated with that do not cause conflict. And I can throw out tons of research and books to that. Charles Tilly, Karina Costa, there's so many, you know. The problem comes when those cultural influences and so on are used and manipulated and exploited to differentiate between insiders and outsiders, to apportion opportunities for and against. The moment that kicks in, culture and identity cannot, it's the same with the religion. The moment you comment about religion, but you're denying me space to be recognized and giving yourself space to say, I'm right and you are wrong. The moment you use those forms of judgment, those forms of actually, it's called positioning. The moment culture and religion are exploited to position, differences definitely come in, because as Karina Koristalina has explained, immediately, the moment comparison kicks in, the next stage is counteraction. The moment you counteract, confrontation. You get what I mean? It's comparison, counteraction, confrontation, period. That is the process. So the moment those cultures kick in, now within the education setting, within government, within social interactions, we are suggesting that that is not the approach, because that's not the role of culture. The role of culture is not up there to differentiate. The role of culture is to bridge. But the problem is when political elites and other manipulators utilize those differences to deny and to differentiate insiders and outsiders, us versus the haves and have-nots. Period. Then it's done. You know. So you are very right, but we could not lose the opportunity that at the end of the day, even in Uganda here, every time we have had a height in political differences, the fallback has always been on the tribe and culture to mobilize constituencies. And that is why we have had this pendulum swinging. Power goes to the north, comes to the central, goes to the north, now it is in the west. We don't know where it's going to hit next. So, because the tendency is the excluded fall back onto the tribe, mobilize, organize, and compete for power. But that's not the role of culture. Culture builds bonds, value systems that are there. Me speaking a different language from you is no reason to deny you access to a better hospital or a job. The problem is if you say you will not go there because you speak Acholi, and it is me to join because I'm Uganda. You get what I mean? Then that is the problem. Are we talking about an utopian kind of society? Yes, what's wrong with it? The world has changed. You get what I mean? So, the poverty aspect, Commissioner, it was very influential in terms of mobilizing. Okay, it is many youth perceive this. Of course, it is compounded by other vices around it, corruption, abuse of public offices, and so on and so forth. And people therefore feel that they are predisposed to be, we are struggling, but we are made to be this because of that. The moment that attribution occurs, then perceptions emerge. They steal our money, they hate us, they do this, and so on, and everything else follows. So, but I want to link that to what you just said about people, how do they fight, how do they respond? And you have mentioned a few books. James Scott, and I've shared this book with some of my students, wrote a book called The Weapons of the Weak. Everyday forms of peasant resistance. How do the peasants resist a strong state? My friend, and I've shared this with some people in the military, and I told them, even in the NRM, that the biggest resistance you have is not the political opposition party. It is on the street. The weak people have very strong means and tools of resistance that are cheap, accessible, easy to maintain, and for them, the moment you deploy on the street and tear gas and so on, it is an incentive to your tumulinakati. Don't think you're exercising power. The more you militarize, for the weak, it is an incentive to continue the resistance. And if you study all civil rights movement, the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, civil rights movement in the United States, every time the state increased its presence and coercive and violence, the resistance became strong at the grassroots. Because then they knew you have nowhere to go. And those ones, you can't win them. Because actually, James Scott mentions that no civil war, no regime change, no military coup succeeds without a pre-existing peasant resistance against a regime. The moment the resistance kicks in, peasants are very patient. They are very strong. And they are very organized and very rational actors. They don't need a leader. They just use political opportunities to come on stage, make a statement, sit back. Chiza Besigye is coming from the airport, they hold him for 6 hours. They make a statement, sit back and wait. Bobby Wine comes, they jump on the wagon, make a statement, sit back. Another, for them in the process, they are weakening the state. And that is a peasant resistance. That is how it functions. Even an NRA war would not have succeeded without a pre-existing peasant resistance against Obote.
Yeah.
There was a resistance against Obote, and the NRM built onto that. And the NRM has allowed the same peasant resistance, because the peasant resistance doesn't end until the conditions that affect them are solved. They will always resist, regardless of which regime. When you come in, you promise them air, they will know, and they will sit back and start wearing you down. They foot drag. They are supposed to pay taxes, they don't pay. And it's a custom message. You get what I mean?
Yeah.
So poverty plays a role in terms of mobilizing people. Okay? But it is also, but these non-participants in violence, they don't just sit there to receive poverty and experience it and internalize it. No. They create alternative pathways to survive, but they know that this is your responsibility.